The room was filled with quiet voices, the kind of whispers that travel like small winds through empty streets. Cameras had just stopped rolling, and the stage lights dimmed into a softer glow. Sandra Bullock sat on the edge of a wooden chair, her hands folded, her eyes heavy with something that was not sadness alone, but also the weight of years carried without pause. She had smiled through interviews, smiled through rehearsals, smiled through awards, but now that the crowd had left, silence pressed against her chest. Ana de Armas noticed it first. She had been sitting a few seats away, still glowing from the evening's bright applause, still new enough in her journey to feel both the thrill and the pressure. Ana leaned forward, her dark eyes searching Sandra's face. There was no makeup strong enough to hide the trembling in someone's hands. Ana did not speak at first. She only looked, quietly, with the kind of patience that is rare in a world where everyone is rushing to speak before they listen. In that pause, Keanu Reeves walked closer. He had been standing quietly in the back of the room, leaning against a wall, watching both women from a distance. Keanu had always been like this, silent but steady, never needing the spotlight, but always ready when the shadows felt too heavy for someone else. He saw Sandra lower her gaze, saw her trying to hide a storm inside. He stepped forward, slow and respectful, his voice soft enough to break the silence without shattering it. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. Sandra looked up, startled, because those words felt almost like they had been pulled from a secret place inside her. She had not spoken about her pain, not tonight, not to anyone. But Keanu's words were not about details, not about headlines, not about reasons. They were about presence. Ana shifted closer now, her voice gentle, unsure but honest. "Sometimes even strong people need someone to sit with them." She was younger, but her eyes carried warmth. She did not try to give advice. She did not tell stories about herself. She simply acknowledged Sandra's silence, and that alone had power. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment. Memories washed over her. The times she had been strong when others leaned on her. The times she had stood in the center of a room and given light to people who had none. But tonight, she felt like her own light had burned low. And yet, here they were, two people by her side, not asking her to perform, not asking her to be perfect, only asking her to be real. The air shifted in the room. What had been heavy now felt lighter, not because the problems were solved, but because loneliness had cracked open. Keanu sat down in the empty chair next to Sandra, his quiet presence like a wall that would not fall. Ana leaned in, her hand resting lightly on Sandra's arm. No words needed. Then came a sound from the far corner of the room, a stage manager calling out that the next rehearsal was about to begin. The outside world was ready to move on, but for the three of them, time had slowed. Sandra took a deep breath. Her lips trembled, but then a small smile appeared, fragile yet honest. "Thank you," she whispered. Keanu gave a small nod, no speech, no performance, only a steady truth in his eyes. Ana's smile deepened, carrying the quiet message that strength is not about standing alone. And so it began, not as a story of fame or roles on a screen, but as a story of three souls meeting at the exact moment when one needed silence, one needed courage, and one needed hope. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not the ones told under bright lights, but the ones lived when the lights have already gone out. The next day began with the same rush of schedules and calls, the kind of rhythm that leaves no space for real feelings. Sandra Bullock was expected at a press interview. Ana de Armas had to meet with a director for her upcoming project, and Keanu Reeves had training rehearsals for a role that demanded discipline. But in each of their minds, the quiet moment they had shared the night before stayed alive. It was as if a thread had been tied between them, invisible yet strong. Sandra walked into the interview room with her usual grace. The cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, questions came in quick bursts. She smiled politely, gave answers that sounded right, and kept her posture steady. Yet behind her calm voice, her heart still carried the weight of unspoken fears. She wondered if anyone could see through her surface, but every time the memory of Keanu's steady words returned, she felt a small anchor inside, keeping her from drifting too far. Meanwhile, Anna sat across from her director in a small studio office. The walls were filled with sketches and storyboards for the film, and the air smelled of coffee that had grown cold. The director spoke about long shooting hours, expectations, and how much was at stake for the studio. Anna listened, nodding, but her mind was not only on the project. She thought of Sandra's trembling hands from the night before. She thought of how even someone so admired could still feel fragile. It gave her a strange kind of strength, because if Sandra could allow herself to be human, then maybe Anna did not need to hide her own doubts either. Keanu, on the other hand, had spent his morning in silence, moving through training drills. He repeated the same moves again and again, his body working with precision while his mind traveled elsewhere. He remembered Sandra's eyes, the way they carried both pride and pain. He remembered Anna's patience, the way she had simply stayed. Keanu understood something that many failed to see, that true strength was not loud, it was quiet, and it was built in the spaces where no audience was watching. Later that evening, the three of them crossed paths again. This time, it was not planned. The city outside was buzzing with lights and traffic, but inside the small cafe where they found themselves, there was a softer atmosphere. Sandra had chosen the place because it was quiet, far from the crowds. Anna had arrived by chance, drawn by the need for a moment alone after a long day. Keanu had simply walked in, searching for a warm drink and some calm. When their eyes met across the room, it felt almost like fate. Sandra smiled first, a little surprised but also relieved. Anna laughed gently, as if the world had played a small trick by bringing them together again. Keanu only nodded, the corner of his mouth lifting in a calm recognition. They sat together at a corner table. The cafe lights were soft, casting a glow on their faces, making the moment feel intimate yet free of pressure. For the first few minutes, they spoke of simple things, the weather, the traffic, the taste of the coffee. But slowly, without forcing it, the conversation deepened. Sandra finally admitted, "Sometimes I feel like people expect me to be strong all the time. But I am tired. I am human." Anna listened carefully. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "It is not weakness to say that. It is the opposite. You give people courage when you show that even you have limits." Keanu added, his voice steady, "We live in a world that mistakes silence for emptiness. But silence can hold the most powerful truths. You don't need to fight alone." Sandra's eyes grew wet, though she tried to hold back the tears. She felt embarrassed, but neither Anna nor Keanu looked at her with pity. They looked at her with respect, the kind that sees beyond the mask and honors the person beneath. As they sat there, a small storm began outside the cafe. Rain tapped against the windows, thunder rolled in the distance. People outside rushed with umbrellas, cars splashed through puddles. But inside, the three of them remained still, bound by something larger than the noise outside. And then came an unexpected twist. A stranger at the next table, an older woman with kind but tired eyes, leaned toward them. She had been listening without meaning to, and now she whispered, "Thank you for speaking this way. I lost my husband last year, and I thought I had to hide my weakness. Hearing you gives me hope." Her words fell like a stone in water, rippling through the moment. Sandra, Anna, and Keanu turned to her, each realizing that their quiet honesty had reached further than they had imagined. It was not just about them anymore. It was about anyone who felt unseen, anyone who carried pain silently. The three of them exchanged a look, one filled with quiet understanding. What had started as a private bond was becoming something larger. They stayed together until the rain slowed, their conversation moving between laughter, memories, and truths that usually stayed locked away. By the time they stood to leave, each of them felt changed. Sandra's steps were lighter, Anna's eyes carried more certainty, and Keanu's silence felt not just steady, but guiding. None of them knew what the days ahead would bring, but one thing was already clear. This connection was not accidental. It was the beginning of something that would test them, strengthen them, and inspire more than just the three of them. The morning after the rain, the city looked washed clean. Streets glistened with puddles that reflected the rising sun, and the air carried the freshness that only comes after a storm. But inside Sandra's mind, the storm had not fully passed. She woke early, sat by her window, and stared out at the quiet world. Her thoughts wandered through memories, moments of strength, moments of weakness, and moments when she had no one to lean on. Yet now she thought of Anna and Keanu, of the stranger in the cafe who had whispered her gratitude, and something inside her shifted. Sandra decided she would no longer hide behind the perfect mask. But courage is not a single step. It is a path, and each step feels heavier than the last. She dressed slowly that morning, her hands trembling as she prepared for another long day of cameras and questions. Across town, Anna was rehearsing lines in a studio. The director kept pushing her harder, demanding emotion she could not yet find. Frustration filled the air. Anna tried again and again, but the words came out empty. Finally, she dropped the script and admitted in a quiet voice, "I don't feel strong today." The room grew silent. The director frowned, impatient, but before he could speak, Anna thought of Sandra's honesty at the cafe. She remembered Keanu's words about silence holding truth. So instead of pretending, she said, "Give me a moment, please." She stepped outside, standing in the cool air, and allowed herself to feel instead of perform. The memory of Sandra's tears reminded her that strength was not about control, but about allowing real emotions to surface. When she returned, her performance carried a rawness that surprised even her. The director said nothing, but his eyes revealed he had finally seen what he wanted. Keanu spent his day in training again, but something unusual happened. One of the younger actors stumbled during a stunt and twisted his ankle. Panic rose quickly, assistants rushing in with worried voices. The actor, embarrassed and in pain, tried to insist he was fine. But Keanu knelt beside him, placed a steady hand on his shoulder and said, "You don't need to hide pain. Healing starts when you admit it." The young man's eyes softened, tears forming though he tried to resist them. Keanu's calm presence turned the chaos into quiet, and the injured actor finally allowed himself to be helped. That night, the three of them met again, this time not by accident, but by choice. Sandra had invited Anna and Keanu to her home, a quiet place filled with books, old photographs, and warm light. When they arrived, they found her sitting by a piano, playing soft notes that drifted through the room like whispers of memory. Anna listened in silence, her eyes glowing with respect. Keanu leaned against the wall, his face calm but watchful. When Sandra finished, she turned to them and said, "I used to play this when I was scared. It reminded me that even broken notes can still make music." Anna stepped closer. "And tonight it reminded us that even broken hearts can still give hope." Keanu nodded, adding softly, "Sometimes the cracks are where the light enters." Their words settled into the air like seeds, and for a long moment, none of them moved. But then came an unexpected knock at the door. Sandra froze, her hands tightening. Visitors at this hour were rare. When she opened the door, she found a reporter standing there, holding a camera, eyes sharp with curiosity. The reporter had followed her home, hungry for a headline. "We heard you've been seen meeting privately with Keanu Reeves and Ana de Armas," the reporter said quickly. "Is there a secret project, or is it something else?" Sandra's heart pounded. This was exactly what she feared. the outside world breaking into her private space, turning moments of truth into spectacle. Before she could answer, Keanu stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "This is not your story to take. Please leave." The reporter hesitated, caught off guard by Keanu's steady eyes. After a long pause, he turned and walked away, though Sandra knew the threat of exposure still lingered. When she closed the door, her hands trembled again, but this time she was not alone. Anna placed a hand on her shoulder. Keanu stood close, his presence like a shield. Sandra whispered, "I don't know if I can keep doing this. The world wants a perfect face, not the truth." Anna replied gently, "Then let's give them something stronger than perfection. Let's give them honesty." Keanu added, "They can twist headlines, but they cannot twist the strength of what we live." The night grew heavier with those words. The storm outside might have ended, but a new storm was waiting, one that would test not just their strength, but their bond. The days that followed were uneasy. Sandra tried to return to her normal routines, but whispers had already begun to spread. The reporter who came to her home had not published a full story yet, but rumors started moving like shadows through the industry. People asked questions she could not answer. Some wondered if there was a hidden project. Others hinted at scandal. Sandra felt the walls closing in. Anna noticed the change first. When she arrived at a meeting, she heard two assistants whispering, "Did you hear about Sandra? Something's going on." Their voices carried a sharp edge of curiosity that made Anna's heart tighten. She wanted to defend Sandra, to silence the rumors, but she remembered Keanu's steady warning, fighting lies with anger only feeds them. So she held her tongue and waited. Keanu, meanwhile, sensed what was happening even before words reached him. He had lived long enough in the public eye to know how quickly a story could twist, how easily truth could be buried under gossip. But he also knew that strength was not about controlling the storm. It was about standing steady until it passed. They met again at Sandra's house, this time with heavier silence between them. Sandra sat near the piano, but did not play. Her hands were clenched, her eyes distant. Finally, she spoke. "I am tired of being watched. I am tired of being told who I should be. I only wanted a quiet life, but even my silence has become news." Anna leaned forward, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Then maybe it is time to stop hiding. Maybe the world needs to see the truth of who you are, not the mask they expect." Sandra shook her head. "If I show them weakness, they will destroy me." Keanu's voice entered then, deep and calm. "Weakness is not what they will see. They will see courage, but courage always comes with a price." The words settled into the room like heavy stones. None of them spoke for a long moment. Later that evening, a phone call shattered the quiet. Sandra's agent called, her voice filled with urgency. "The reporter has enough material. The story will go out tomorrow. They are saying you're falling apart, that you can't handle the pressure anymore. They are even twisting your friendship with Anna and Keanu into something false." Sandra's face went pale. She dropped the phone onto the table, her chest tightening. This was her fear becoming real, her truth stolen, her silence turned into a weapon against her. Anna moved quickly, taking Sandra's hand. "Don't let them decide your story. You can choose how the world sees you. You still have your voice." Keanu nodded slowly, his calm presence unshaken. "If they speak lies, then you must speak truth, not for them, but for yourself." That night, none of them slept much. Sandra sat awake by her piano, her fingers pressing soft notes in the dark. Anna wrote words in a notebook, trying to shape the right message, something honest but strong. Keanu stayed near, silent but present, a steady figure who reminded them both that storms always end. The next morning came with heavy clouds, as if the sky itself carried the weight of what was about to happen. The article was published. Headlines spread fast. Photos of Sandra leaving the cafe with Keanu and Anna appeared everywhere. The words were cruel, painting her as fragile, painting their bond as suspicious, twisting kindness into weakness. The world outside rushed to judge, but inside, the three of them gathered together again. Sandra held the article in her hand, her face pale but her eyes slowly hardening. "They think they know me," she whispered, "but they don't, and maybe it is time I show them." Anna leaned closer, her voice filled with determination. "Then let's do it together." Keanu's steady gaze met theirs. "Truth can break chains stronger than lies. If we face this, we face it as one." The choice was no longer about silence. It was about courage, about reclaiming the story from those who tried to twist it. Sandra knew the risk, but as she looked at Anna's hopeful eyes and Keanu's unshakable calm, she felt something she had not felt in a long time, strength that was not borrowed from applause or expectation, but born from trust. The stage was set. The world would hear her truth, but the cost would be high. The morning of the press conference came heavy with tension. The city outside moved as it always did, cars rushing through streets, people walking with hurried steps, cameras already flashing at other doors. But for Sandra, Anna, and Keanu, time felt slower, as if every second carried the weight of choice. Sandra stood in front of her mirror, adjusting her simple black dress. She did not choose it for style or beauty, but for truth. It was plain, without glitter, without distraction. Her hair was tied back, her face natural. She wanted nothing to hide behind. Anna entered the room quietly, carrying a small notebook. She had written words for Sandra through the night, suggestions that might help, but she did not push them. She only placed the notebook on the table and whispered, "Use them if you need, but speak with your heart first." Keanu was waiting near the door. His presence, calm as ever, filled the space with quiet strength. He did not ask if Sandra was ready. He knew readiness is not a feeling, but a decision. When she finally looked at him, he gave a small nod, the kind that carried the weight of belief without a single word. When they arrived, the room was already full. Cameras pointed at the stage, flashes cutting through the air like lightning. Reporters whispered to one another, their questions ready like arrows. Sandra walked to the center with Anna and Keanu by her side. She felt her chest tighten as she faced the crowd, but then she looked to her right and saw Anna's patient eyes to her left and saw Keanu's steady presence. And she remembered the cafe, the piano, the rain, the stranger who had thanked her. She took a deep breath and began. "You have read stories about me," she said, her voice low at first, then stronger as it filled the room. "You have seen pictures. You have heard whispers. Some of those things are true. I am not perfect. I do feel tired. I do feel human. And I will not hide that anymore." The room grew quiet. Reporters lowered their pens, some surprised, some uncertain. Sandra continued. "I have been told that showing weakness will destroy me. But what if weakness is not the end of strength, but the beginning of it? What if honesty is stronger than any mask I could wear?" She paused, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Anna stepped closer, not speaking, just showing silent support. Keanu stood firm, his face calm but unshakable, a silent wall against the judgment in the room. Sandra's voice grew clearer. "The people you see with me, Anna and Keanu, are not here because of headlines or projects. They are here because they chose kindness when I had nothing left to give, and I will not allow that kindness to be turned into scandal. It is not shameful to need help. It is not shameful to cry. It is not shameful to be human. For a long moment, no one spoke. The cameras clicked, but the room felt heavy with silence. Then, unexpectedly, one of the reporters in the back lowered his camera and asked in a softer voice, "So you are saying weakness can be strength?" Sandra looked directly at him. "I am saying truth is strength, and the truth is that none of us can carry life alone." Her words cut through the room. Even those who had come seeking scandal felt something shift inside them. Anna, unable to hold back anymore, added gently, "When Sandra spoke last night, she reminded me that courage is not always loud. Sometimes courage is sitting in silence and admitting you are afraid." Keanu's voice joined theirs, calm and steady. "And sometimes courage is standing beside someone so they never have to face fear alone." Together, the three of them stood in front of the flashing lights, not as stars in a film, but as people. When the press conference ended, the room did not erupt in questions as expected. Instead, it emptied slowly, reporters walking out with quiet faces, each carrying more than just a story. They carried reflection. Outside, a crowd had gathered, unsure of what to expect. But when Sandra stepped through the doors, followed by Anna and Keanu, something remarkable happened. Instead of shouts or insults, the crowd clapped. It was not the loud, wild applause of red carpets, but a steady, respectful sound. Sandra's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were not from fear. They were from relief. Anna leaned closer and whispered, "They see you now. Not the mask, but you." Keanu gave a small smile, his voice quiet but certain. "And that is stronger than any headline." But deep inside, they all knew this was not the end. It was only the first battle. The world does not change in a day, and challenges would come again. Yet the bond between them had grown into something unbreakable, something forged in the fire of truth. The days after the press conference were filled with noise. News channels replayed Sandra's words again and again. Some praised her honesty, others questioned her strength. On social media, voices clashed, some calling her brave, others calling her weak. But in the middle of the noise, something began to grow, something no one had expected. Letters started arriving at Sandra's home. Some were from fans, some from strangers, some even from people who had never watched her films. They all carried the same message: "Thank you for saying what I could not." A single mother wrote that she had been hiding her tears for years, pretending to be strong for her children, but now she finally told them the truth and felt lighter. A young man said he had been afraid to admit he was depressed, but after hearing Sandra, he asked for help. An elderly woman confessed she had been silent about her loneliness since her husband died, but Sandra's words gave her courage to speak again. Sandra read each letter with trembling hands. Every word cut deep, not because of the pain inside them, but because of the hope they carried. She realized that by speaking her truth, she had given others permission to speak theirs. Anna, too, found her life changing. At the studio, people looked at her differently, not as just a rising actress, but as someone with a voice, someone who stood beside Sandra when the world tried to twist the story. Young actors came to her, asking for advice, not about fame, but about how to stay human in a world that demanded perfection. Anna smiled softly and told them, "Kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest choice you can make." Keanu, as always, remained quiet, but his silence was no longer the silence of shadows. It was the silence of strength. People began writing about him as well, not for his roles, but for his presence. An article called him the man who speaks less but saves more hearts. When asked about it, he only shook his head and said, "I only did what anyone should do: be there when someone needs you." But the world is never only kind. Another wave of criticism rose. A new article claimed Sandra's tears were staged, that the press conference was a performance. The lies spread fast. Once again, judgment tried to cover the truth. This time, though, something different happened. People who had been touched by Sandra's honesty stood up for her. Fans defended her online. Strangers posted videos sharing their own stories of struggle and healing. Journalists who had been in the room at the press conference wrote pieces saying, "We saw her tears, and they were real." The voices of the people grew louder than the voices of the critics. For once, the truth was not drowned. It rose. Sandra, sitting by her piano one evening with Anna and Keanu beside her, smiled through her tears as she read the messages. "I thought the storm would break me," she whispered. "But maybe it was meant to show me that storms can water seeds I did not know I planted." Anna touched her arm and said, "You gave people courage without even knowing it." Keanu added softly, "And sometimes courage is not about winning, but about standing and refusing to fall." They sat together in that quiet room, the piano untouched, the letters spread across the table, and they realized something powerful. What had begun as a private bond between three people had become a light for thousands. In the weeks that followed, the story changed. Interviews no longer asked about scandal, but about healing. Magazines no longer wrote about perfection, but about resilience. Schools invited Sandra to speak about honesty. Organizations invited Anna to talk about kindness. And Keanu, though he refused many requests, continued to show up quietly for those who needed strength, never asking for thanks. One evening, they returned to the same cafe where it had all begun, the night of the rain. This time, the room was filled not with whispers, but with laughter. People recognized them, yes, but no one rushed for autographs. Instead, some simply nodded with respect. Some smiled with gratitude. Sandra looked around and whispered, "The world has not become perfect, but maybe it has become a little kinder." Anna smiled, "Because you showed them that being human is not a weakness." Keanu lifted his cup, his voice calm and certain. "To truth, to kindness, to strength that never has to shout." They clinked their cups together, not as stars, not as performers, but as three people who had faced the storm and walked through it side by side. The night outside was quiet, the streets still damp from a light rain. But inside, in their hearts, there was a fire that no storm could ever put out.